Hey everyone, I'm Steve. This is the American Garage.
This time, on the American Garage, Steve tackles the task of rebuilding the engine on the David Bradley. Andrea drops by to lend a hand. All this and more coming up on the American Garage.
Welcome back to the American Garage. As you've seen in past episodes, we've covered how to disassemble a project, how to organize ourselves, and how to remove rust and do some priming to get everything protected. As you see, we've got all of our prime pieces here on the shelf. Let's get busy. For today, we're going to start working with the motors. The David Bradley is really a simple machine. It really consists of an engine, a transmission, and a belt. And we can engage and disengage the engine as we want it to move. So, being such a simple piece of machinery, the most complicated thing mechanically is the motor. And this is the motor that we have that came with the tractor. Now this is an old Briggs & Stratton motor, and it looks like pretty much just a gnarly, greasy mess at this point. But I left it like this on purpose so that I can show you what to do and when you get a project like this, and what steps do you take to determine, well, one, is it any good? And two, how do we determine what needs to be done? And how far do we need to take it apart? If everything mechanically inside is okay, there's no sense in taking it apart. For starters, let's see if we can determine whether or not we have a good motor. Now the first thing that we're going to do is we want to make sure that the motor turns. If the motor turns without any weird sounds, then we know the insides are probably just fine. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the pulley and I'm just going to turn it. And notice how freely this turns. Because it turns so freely, it tells me that the motor is not seized up on the inside and all the parts are working like they should. So it sounds to me like everything on the inside is good. So that's a very good sign. What we're going to do is we're going to do what's called a compression test. The compression test will tell us if the rings are good or if the rings are bad. So I'm going to take the spark plug out. This is an old spark plug. We'll use it just to plug the hole later on. This is a compression tester. If you don't have one of these, talk to one of your mechanic friends. He probably has one in his toolbox. They're not very expensive. I think I bought mine for about $65. You might find them a little bit less. Check at your local auto parts store. They'll have stuff like this hanging around. But what happens with this is we've got a threaded hose that we put into where the spark plug goes. And we just tighten it down just as tight as we can with our hands. Doesn't need to be much tighter than that. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to turn the engine. Okay, so we've got our starter spinner on here. Let's go ahead and give it a pull and see what happens. So I'm going to wrap my rope around here. This is how they used to do it back in the 40s and 50s. Okay. That pull didn't register anything. Let's give it one more pull just for good measure. And make sure this is doubly tight. Let's give it one more pull for good measure. Okay, that was a good pull. And I've got nothing on my gauge. Can you see the gauge? It's registering right down close to 0. It's not registering anything at all. So that's a bad sign. But it tells us something about what's inside the engine. Now, we thought we had a good working engine here. Maybe this is why this one was sitting up and nobody was using it. So we have to find out what's going on the inside. Now, let's first think about what we already know. We know that we're going through the cycles because there's nothing clunking around on the inside when we turn the motor. So we know there's nothing internally going wrong there. So, like I was telling you, this was to see if the ring around the piston was bad or not. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe one of the valves got stuck in the open position. And my suspicion is that's probably the case. Okay, you ready to have a look inside? Whoa. Now come in close and have a look at this. We've got nothing but a gnarly mess. The top of the piston is covered with all kinds of crud of some kind. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn the engine. I see this valve coming up. This one's coming up. Now, there could be a couple of things wrong here. Now, mechanically, everything is working in order because the piston is coming up and down and the valves are going up and down. But there could be a couple of different problems. One is we got all this crud on top of here. Yuck. I don't even know what that is, but that can't be good. It should look like this, and it does not. I see that the valves are going up and down, so I know it's not that they're stuck open. See, they're not stuck at all. They're doing their jobs just fine. All this crud on the piston does concern me. But let's make the piston go all the way down, and let's look at the inside. Can you see that? Now, I'm going to feel the wall of the cylinder inside here. And what I'm feeling for are scratches. Now, a mechanic isn't going to call them scratches. A mechanic is going to call them scorings, where the wall of the cylinder gets scored, you'll hear him say. What he's talking about is that scratches develop on the sides of the cylinder. I don't feel any real scratches or scoring, so it doesn't appear that the cylinder itself is bad. So it can only be one of two things. Either the rings on our piston are bad, or two, even though these guys are going up and down and doing their job, maybe they're not sitting back down because maybe there's too much crud under here. You know, sometimes some projects need an extra hand. And in this case, I've asked Andrea to come over, a friend of mine, and she's going to help me take the valves out of the engine. Now, last time we had discovered that there was no compression in the engine. So we decided it was either the valves were not seating properly or the rings were bad. Well, we still don't know which is the real problem. So what we're going to do is we've got to take the engine apart. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to take the valves out of the engine. Andrea, are you ready to help me to take the valves out of the engine today?
Sure.
So let's get started.
Now what you need to do here is compress these springs. And if you notice when I push up on the spring, the valve goes up with it. That's because of the pressure that the spring is putting on the stem of the valve. There's a pin in here, which we'll show you in a second, that needs to come out. There's a pin holding this valve in place with the spring. And what my goal is is to get the pin out. This is where a friend might be able to help you.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
This is one of those things, Andrea, it's good to have two people.
I
Isn't
see
it?
the pin.
You see it?
Yes.
Okay, I'll hold it. There you go.
There's the pin. Do not lose this. Now you need to push the spring up so you can see the pin. That little pin needs to come out so you can remove the valve.
There you go.
Valve comes right out. And out comes the spring with the seat. Keep the seat with it so you don't get your parts separated. And put the pin back in the valve. It's always a good idea to keep your parts together. Be careful this step right here, because if you let go of this spring with all of the built up energy, it could go flying across the room, quite literally.
All right. Now, how do we keep these two from getting confused? Did you notice something when we were taking it apart, Andrea?
One of them says in, and this one says EX. So I suppose that's the exhaust, and this is the intake.
Intake, exhaust. And that's how we can keep them straight. Okay. This concludes part 1 of 3 in the engine rebuild episode. In part 1, we just learned how to diagnose different problems inside of an engine. In part 2, I will put the engine back together, and Andrea will show us how to make gaskets. Stay tuned for more on the American Garage.